And in 6 weeks into the offseason, we do have a hire. Hallelujah. Eddie Garrison and Kevin Bowen, we are here in studio. That is Eddie Garrison, the other clapping you heard. I am Kevin Bowen, back another edition of Kevin's Corner. Shane Steichen, the new head coach of the Indianapolis Colts at the age of 37. He becomes the youngest head coach in Indianapolis Colts history. I think Don Shula, if you go back to the Baltimore Colts, a hair younger. And the third youngest in the NFL right now behind Kevin O'Connell and Sean McVay. Laying out the plan for today's podcast, I just got back from the Steichen press conference with Chris Ballard and Jim Irsay, so we'll focus a little bit more later in the pod on those comments. First time hearing from Steichen and, of course, Ballard and Irsay. But right off the jump here, Eddie, let's focus on Steichen as a hire, and obviously we'll get to the Twitter questions. I think throughout the process, and I thought, honestly, Chris Ballard kind of said this today, you're not going to necessarily kind of put yourself into one corner as, okay, only offensive coaches, or those sorts of things. But, boy, it is an added bonus. And when you look at the landscape of the AFC and all the quarterbacks that made the playoffs this year and all of them being, 27 or younger, and you look at the trend of the offensive coaches in today's NFL, this guy's resume has a lot that you like about that. A lot. And when we laid out the pros and cons on last week's podcast, it's not the fact that he's been a quarterback's coach. Him and Brian Callahan, the quarterback resume right next to each other. To me, Eddie, it's the diverse aspect to those three quarterbacks.
Agreed.
We'll obviously get into all of that on the podcast. It's the diverse fact of the offensive systems he's been in. It's a comment Norv Turner made earlier today. You don't see a guy with two young quarterbacks in Justin Herbert and Jalen Hurts have success in two different systems. Mm-hmm. And yet he's already done that with on both of those rookie deals. In Herbert's case, his rookie season. So I just think there's a lot to like about him offensively, innovative. I thought he made a pretty good first impression today. But just in general, Eddie, your thoughts?
He was my number one candidate the entire time. I always had the sense that he was the lead candidate. I never got the sense that Jeff Saturday was really the favorite during any of this based off the people that I talked to. I basically had the feeling it was Steichen, Morris, and then the wild card of Rich Bisaccia, kind of those final three. I thought Callahan was an interesting one for them, but I think they liked the resume of comparison in the offensive mind, like you noted, of Shane Steichen compared to Callahan, and then the leadership quality of Rich Bisaccia, I think was really, really intriguing to Chris Ballard and company. I was really impressed with what he had to, not really with what he had to say, but how he had to say everything during the press conference today. Loved the hire. I'm just ready now for it to be April so we can find out who the quarterback is to fit the marriage of Shane Steichen and future QB.
Yeah, I thought that was a good way you said that of how he sounded today. We'll get more into that in a few minutes. But, again, let's just focus here on Steichen as the hire to begin the pod. If you don't get quarterback figured out, you're screwed.
Yep.
I mean, just to kind of summarize it shortly, that's it. This isn't Tony Dungy walking in with Peyton Manning already here in 2001. You've got to go out and you've got to find that quarterback. So I think that adds to it. I was talking with somebody who's on the Chargers staff with Steichen, and pretty much said, I like the hire, really smart guy, but I like it even more considering the need at quarterback.
Yeah.
That just kind of adds to it. Again, a variety of styles, a variety of personalities at quarterback as well, in Phillip Rivers and Justin Herbert and Jalen Hurts. And again, look at all three. Rivers, more of a Norv Turner offense, more of a pocket passer, of course. Extreme intellect. Then you go to Jalen Hurts, and let's not forget, Eddie, about Justin Herbert. Let's not forget, Justin Herbert was not the week one starter for the Chargers as a rookie.
Yeah.
It was Tyrod Taylor. So it's not like Herbert got all these great offseason reps with the starting unit. And then you have the freak accident of who knows if it was an accident now looking back on it, but, Tyrod Taylor gets shot up before that game.
Punctures his lung or something like that, yeah.
All of a sudden, Herbert's starting. Herbert plays well. He keeps the job. And he was the offensive rookie of the year. 31 touchdowns, 10 interceptions. That is a crazy good ratio for, again, a guy that wasn't supposed to be the week one starter for the franchise. And then obviously transition to Jalen Hurts. And when Nick Sirianni gave him the play calling duties, about the midway point of last season, that would have been the 2021 year, just to clarify, they won 6 of 7 at one point down the stretch. They made the playoffs, and obviously you carried into this year where Hurts becomes an MVP candidate.
I think the run game even took off with underneath Steichen,
right,
in comparison to previously with Sirianni too.
And so I think this is a guy that obviously is very confident in his play calling. He will call plays. We'll get more into that, when we talk about some of the presser thoughts there coming up here in a bit. But again, what he did with the 3 quarterbacks, him and Rivers remain very close to this day. I think that tells me something that Phillip Rivers does not hang out with milquetoast football people. You better be high football intellect to hang out with Phillip Rivers. And that is what he brings to the table here in Shane Steichen. One of the things on Steichen's resume that I find one of the more interesting is he played quarterback at UNLV, Eddie. When he was at UNLV, Norv Turner's son, Scott, was also there. Norv Turner gave Shane Steichen his first job in the NFL on the defensive side of the ball. Here's a guy that is hiring, whatever Steichen was, 24, 25. I think he was a grad assistant at UNLV for a couple seasons after he got done playing. You're hiring a 24, 25-year-old to your NFL staff, and he was a quarterback in college, and you're hiring him to be a defensive assistant? Like, that just goes to show you that college year Shane Steichen left an impression on a very respected NFL head coach.
Yeah.
To the point where he's willing to put him on the other side of the ball. It's not offensive quality control. It's not offensive assistant. It's not assistant quarterbacks coach. Whatever low-level label you want to throw on it, you're hiring him to be a defensive assistant. And Steichen has been very honest. He did that for 2 years. That, he thinks, helped him kind of look at the game in a different way. Of like, okay, how do I want to dictate to a defense? What do these tendencies mean defensively?
Yeah.
Him and Rivers still look at film on a weekly basis together, kind of breaking it down from almost that side of it as well, which I thought was really, really fascinating. You brought up, the Eagles are certainly a pretty good run team. They run it in a very unique way. I think having Jalen Hurts helps out. When you look at them on Sunday night, Eddie, and I know a lot of Colts fans probably paid a little bit more attention to the game for, A, it's a Super Bowl, and B, Shane Steichen is about to be your head coach. What I see when I watch the Eagles is I see aggressive, I see uber innovative, I see very good situationally. And there was a moment, and I thought Greg Olsen did a really good job pointing this out, but there was a moment on Sunday night where, to me, the play of the game is not necessarily the holding penalty late. It's Jalen Hurts' fumble. Hurts has that fumble.
The false start.
And it was a false start on 3rd and 1, which, they're getting ready to do their usual sneak, which, again, is such a great play and so effective. And it comes to be 3rd and 6, and Hurts fumbles. And the very next play after the Hurts fumble is Shane Steichen dialing up a designed run for Hurts.
Mm-hmm.
Your quarterback just dropped the ball in the Super Bowl.
Literally.
And you are showing no fear, no hesitancy, no scared sort of approach to him. There's no like, hey, let's get Miles Sanders a touch, or maybe a quick one to A.J. Brown on the outside, and let's get back into rhythm. Let's stay ahead of the chains here. No, the design run by Hurts, and I think the next play is when they took a shot down the field. So right away, it's Shane Steichen saying to our best player in the biggest moment that he's ever been in, we believe in you. We're fine. It's just one play, and obviously the Eagles responded quite well. Now, we know how the game ended, but that was something that really stood out to me about Sunday night. I think he comes, like Brian Callahan, he comes from a team that certainly understands the importance of skill, and they are loaded at both wideout spots, and honestly,
tight end too.
I'm going to give a co-MVP to A.J. Brown and Dallas Goedert. If the Eagles would have won that game, you saw what Goddard did. So I think and hope the emphasis will be there to the GM, and we need more dudes because we don't have enough dudes right now. And I would say before the press conference today, in talking to people that have been with him in the Chargers or have just been around Shane Steichen more than I have, it is a really passionate, really smart individual that if you're going to have Nick Sirianni cussing out Colts fans and crying during the national anthem at one end of the spectrum and Frank Reich at the other end of the spectrum, Shane Steichen's going to be a little bit more Sirianni than he is Reich. And I think you can kind of see that. I think you can hear that today in the press conference. I think if you watch any sort of, mic'd up stuff with him, you do see a little bit of fire. Again, I don't think it's, shit hits the fan and he's throwing stuff through windows or anything. I don't think it's an absurd level of Bob Knight, but I do think, and it's a question that I asked him today during the press conference about what was the biggest thing that you learned from Nick, and he was adamant it was about the accountability. Yeah. And if you don't have that, you got no chance as a leader. So I think all of those things really stand out to me. Other stuff Eagles-wise, I just love what they do pre-snap. I love the motion. I mean, they just cater to Jalen Hurts so well. And, again, I know I'm starting to get into kind of press conference answers, but when you hear Shane Steichen talk about the offense and the quarterback position, Eddie, he talks about it in a very modern way. Yeah. We are going to, throw the football to score points and run the football to win. I mean, that's a modern approach. He specifically mentioned with Herbert and Hurts, it's let's watch Oregon film, let's watch Alabama, Oklahoma film. Yeah. What do they do well, and let's implement that. Yeah. And that's exactly how you have to do it. And that's the stability and the continuity that you need to provide. Again, the most important position in sports. I was thinking yesterday, I was trying to remember which year it was, because I remember specifically Frank Reich talking about Shane Steichen in a press conference with the Colts, and I'm trying to think, well, Frank got fired before the Eagles game this year, so it wouldn't have been this year. Like, when would that have been? So I went back to 2019 and found a quote from Frank. This is when Shane Steichen became the interim play caller for Rivers and the Chargers in 2019. Yeah. And so Reich was asked about it, and I'll just read that quote here. This is Frank Reich on Steichen. He's a really, really smart, good football coach, a really good mind. He played quarterback in college. I would categorize him as one of the young, bright minds in this league, much like Nick Sirianni. I mean, he and Nick are a lot alike. So you guys know what I think of Nick, and I put Shane kind of in that same category.
Nice find, by the way.
Yeah, I got lucky on that one. But, I was fortunate to dig that one up. I see that quote, Eddie, and I think to myself, you know what? One of my first thoughts was, why didn't Shane Steichen, why wasn't he the OC high over Sirianni back in 2018? Mm-hmm. Steichen is more quarterback background. Sirianni's not really quarterback background. Other positions on offense, wide receiver mainly. And, again, he is a little bit more fiery. And he had been with Frank, I think, a little bit longer. So I think those are probably some of the reasons that you had that in there. So, those, I guess, are really the big things that stood out to me, kind of non-press conference related. I'll throw out the couple quotes that the Colts have sent out from Phillip Rivers and Norv Turner real quick. Rivers, within the quote, he goes, his offensive mind and feel for calling a game is elite. Again, Phillip Rivers, folks, they are not hanging out with just chumps. They're not hanging out with you and me, Eddie. Phillip Rivers is not talking football with you and me. And so this is a bright football mind. And now you've got a lot of bright football minds. Obviously you're going to have to find that happy balance between being that, but not being too crazy intellect guy and you just talk over everybody's head. That's going to be a big part of being a leader, and we'll get to that here in just a few minutes. And then the Norv Turner thing, he kind of pointed out what I mentioned earlier about, again, doing what he did with Herbert and doing what he did with Jalen Hurts. Anything else Steichen hire related before we get to the presser?
I don't think I have anything.
I'll add one more. You mentioned some of those finalist names. I do think Aaron Glenn was a rather legit candidate.
I do too.
I do think he left a pretty strong impression.
That name wasn't tossed in there during the press conference for nothing.
No. Yeah, I mean, him, Bisaccia, and Raheem Morris were the three that were tossed in there by the big guy, by Jim Irsay. So with that, I guess let's get into the presser. Just first, a little bit of a lay of the land. I know some people are always curious about like what these things look like. By my count, you had Gus Bradley, you had Bubba Ventrone, you had Ron Miles, you had several other of the defensive staff members. I didn't see anybody offensively in the room. Not that you would from a staff member standpoint. Shane Steichen would not comment about hiring Gus Bradley. Their history is quite evident. 4 years together with the Chargers. If you think back to the game with the Eagles this season, first off, Shane had some nice things to say about Gus Bradley before that game.
Yep.
A hell of a football coach, hell of a human being. I mean, Eddie, the Colts did hold the Eagles to 17 points in that game, the lowest they scored all year with Jalen Hurts under center. So clearly that was a strong impression. I think Gus Bradley did a really nice job this season. I hesitate to act like this is the 85 Bears, or I think at times Colts fans are a little bit too crowning with Gus Bradley. I would like a little bit more of an attacking style, frankly, from that defense. But I can probably live with it. So those are just some of my thoughts, and we'll see if he does retain that staff. The linebackers coach Richard Smith, the DB coach Ron Milas, both of them were also with the Chargers. So Steichen would know those guys. Players, I saw Michael Pittman, Bernard Ryman, Tyquan Lewis.
That's a bit odd.
Quentin Nelson. I assume Lewis is in the building to rehab.
That could be.
Torn patella for him. He's a free agent, so is that where you find it odd?
Yeah.
That he would be in there as a free agent? Yeah. Again, some of these guys...
And I guess he just wouldn't be a guy that I would have thought of to be there. I'd expect like a Pittman or Jonathan Taylor or Quentin Nelson.
Pretty intense rehab.
Those pillar guys, yeah.
And then, a lot of this, Eddie, is like... And these guys are scattered across the country. I know a lot of people are probably like, wait, why wasn't this guy there? Why wasn't that guy there? I mean, the Colts were so quiet about this. I mean, they didn't want to confirm it. I think they finally kind of gave some hints to it yesterday. But, these guys aren't necessarily just going to be like, oh, let me hop on a plane to come watch Shane Steichen talk to the media for 15 minutes.
Yeah.
You don't necessarily need or have to do that for what it's worth. Basically, Jim Irsay laid out the timeline like this. They interviewed Shane Steichen originally on Zoom. I want to say it was January 14th, I believe.
A month ago.
That bye weekend. Eagles got the bye. Yeah, a month ago. Yeah, nice. And then they had the big interview with him a week ago, Friday, Saturday. That was right before Philly left to go to Arizona for the Super Bowl. Irsay said he sat down with him Friday in Philadelphia. Extremely impressed. Very fast mind. That was the phrase that kind of jumped out to me about how Irsay described Steichen. And then the next day, Chris Ballard and other Colts staff members met in person with Shane. And, the typical things you would expect from a high integrity, high character standpoint. They align philosophically, Steichen and Ballard. Again, I want to see some pushback from the head coach with how Chris Ballard has handled things from a personnel standpoint. So that is a comment that I hear. And yeah, I mean, you certainly want your GM and your head coach to be on the same page in so many ways. But don't think for 1 second how Chris Ballard has built this roster is how it needs to continue to be built. Like, oh, yeah, just give me another 6 years and we'll be there. No, I mean, that would be foolish to think that is going to be what wins in today's NFL. And that's why I really appreciate I hear old school when I hear Ballard, and really when I see Ballard act with his roster. When I hear Shane Steichen talk and know where he's been, I see new school. And I think that's what you need. You need an injection of that within your franchise. Now, obviously, how all of that plays out will be fascinating to see unfold. Trying to think what else. Oh, I guess we should talk about Steichen. Shane Steichen's getting ready to speak, Eddie, and I'm thinking to myself, holy hell. Like, can you imagine the last 48 hours for him? Hell, it's not even been 48 hours.
No.
I mean, he just goes from calling plays in the biggest game of his life, the emotional letdown of blowing a 10-point halftime lead, whatever transpires in a losing team party for the Super Bowl.
Yeah.
To being multiple time zones away from your old home in Philly and now your new home in Indianapolis. That awkward period Monday of like, man, don't you want to still like go talk to some of your guys and you can't decompress at all. And he mentioned it during the press conference. He went back at 1 o'clock or at 11 o'clock today, right before the press conference started, and he watched the first quarter of the Super Bowl. He still hadn't sat down and watched it. And then obviously he's preparing for the biggest public moment of his life. I don't know. I don't know Shane Steichen's speaking resume, but today might have been the most people he's ever spoken in front of. I just in terms of how many people in a room, obviously how many people were watching or listening.
They had a lot of people in that room.
There were a lot of people in that room. Yeah, it always has kind of a mini pep rally feel to it at times, but I doesn't shock me he was overwhelmed with emotion like he was and thanking all the people. I thought that was a really nice gesture. He thanked every single Eagles offensive player. I mean, He did not just say Jalen Hurts and AJ, but he saved Jalen Hurts till last. I thought that was a really, really nice gesture there.
And the players with the Chargers, too, that he helped coach
Rivers
too.
And Gates and Keenan Allen that he mentioned.
I think he even mentioned Mike Williams there, too, maybe. I don't know.
Him and Rivers, I can't stress enough, they're extremely close. His 4 pillars, a lot of this can get into kind of coach speak, so I don't want to, stress it too much, but character, preparation, consistency, and relentlessness. Preparation, he was adamant, that is the separator in the NFL, he believes. What do you do Monday through Saturday? And I would agree a lot with that statement.
Me too.
I think what's so fascinating about the NFL is what do you see drawn up Monday through Saturday and the execution of that on Sunday. I thought Greg Olson and Kevin Burkhardt and really Fox in general did a terrific job illustrating a lot of that in the Super Bowl. Of these are the Eagles' tendencies. This is how we can still get Travis Kelce open. When we bring this guy in motion, Sky Moore, Kadarius Toney, they usually pass those off. We're going to make this little wrinkle to it, and hopefully it'll work.
And not to get too much in the weeds here, but Eric Bieniemy was the one who discovered that. For Kansas City, and he discovered it back when he was watching a Jacksonville game, and they did it with Jamal Agnew, and he goes, "We're going to implement this into the game plan, and we're going to do it."
Fascinating stuff.
Yeah,
it's really fascinating, and obviously it's so huge in the NFL when parity is all over the league. I'll say this about Shane Steichen's words, and again, I don't want to overreact to a press conference. I mean, We saw that with what happened with Nick Sirianni, but this is probably the last public setting we see Shane Steichen in until, he'll join us on the morning show, and we'll play that audio here on the podcast at some point. We'll hear him at the Combine, but, really, we aren't going to see him in a big press conference setting again until maybe the draft, maybe OTAs. What I was struck by today was this is a very smart dude that does not need to talk a lot to sound smart.
Yeah.
We've all been around those people. They just talk. And you're like, at times you're like, man, that kind of sounds smart. Or they feel like they need to talk to sound smarter. They feel like they need to say a lot to sound smarter. Shane Steichen is about to be the leader of an NFL football team. You have got to be direct with your communication. I would argue you've got to be concise with your communication because we all have been 22, 23, 24-year-old humans. Attention spans are not going to be lasting too long. And I just felt like Shane Steichen does not waste words.
Nope.
There were some questions that you could tell he didn't really want to answer, and he gave 2 or 3 sentence answers and moved right on. And he's got a pace to how he talks as well. But if you ask him a very specific question, he'll give you a very honest answer and a very direct answer. From a tone standpoint, it's not like he has these crazy kind of highs and lows, and he's super, body languagey with his with how he talks. But I can see why he is an effective communicator. And Devontae Smith and Jalen Hurts, I know both have been on the record saying things like that. They really appreciate how he communicates, and obviously he's running a lot of those offensive meeting rooms, from a Monday through Saturday standpoint for the Eagles there. I could see some stern. I could see some fire. Again, I don't think it's just going to be Bob Knight to be Bob Knight. But he definitely, you can feel his intelligence. You can feel it, and I think you can feel if I'm sitting in that room, I'm going to believe what you're saying.
To me, when I was listening and watching, it felt like he was a guy that's like, I don't really care to do these things, kind of like Mike Woodson-esque. I don't care to do these interviews. I got to do them because I have to do them. But really, I prefer to just sit down, watch football, study football, and build an offense, game plan, or whatever the case is.
Yeah, definitely. I don't think he's going to be going out of his way to doing a ton of media by any means. And I just felt like he was not there to waste anybody's time. And there are some times where you feel people in press conference settings answer questions, Eddie, and after a minute 30, they're done answering and you go back and you transcribe and you're like, that person said nothing. Like if Shane Steichen wants to say nothing, it's over in 15 seconds.
Plus, I mean,
But if he wants to say something, he'll say it in 30 or 35, and you'll go back and you'll be like, oh, wow, there's a lot there.
I think he has a journalism degree, so I think he totally understands what you guys are about and what you guys need from him.
Running Rebels journalism program.
Yeah.
The 12th all-time leading passer, if I'm not mistaken, in UNLV history. Quarterback traits: accuracy, decision-making, ability to create. He obviously mentioned the above the neck. You got to be obsessed with the craft, so we can dive deeper into those comments when it's time to get a little bit closer into the draft. He will call plays. I certainly have a question about just managing game day responsibilities. I think a hire he's got to make is just simply a human being in the press box that's only job is to yell at you when to call timeouts, yell at you when to throw challenge flags, yell at you when to contact officials, all of those things. Like, you need somebody up there that purely does that, and hell, put somebody on the sidelines that can help communicate that in case you're, too in the weeds offensively. But you guys know my concerns I had with Frank Reich on that. Clearly, he thinks, and feels very confident in his play calling. And again, there obviously are play callers in the league that have had great success in calling plays. But, the delegation of in-game responsibilities and those things I think are really important, because I think Nick Sirianni is a really good situational coach. And that's something that you need to make sure that you have here. Again, I asked him about Sirianni and the biggest influence, and he was abundantly clear. Again, direct, spoke with conviction, accountability. You've got to hold people accountable. That is the biggest thing as a first-year head coach he said he experienced from Sirianni, and that this is a player to coach, player to player, coach to coach, all of those things. But if somebody does something wrong, you got to let them know.
17 offensive-minded head coaches, 15 call plays.
Yeah, I remember you saying that to me the other.
And the only two are in the same division, and one of them may have to start calling plays again.
Refresh my memory on that.
The two that do not call plays, Dayball
and Sirianni.
Yep.
Yeah. Yeah, and obviously Dayball might have to after next year, depending on what happens with Mike Kafka. So yeah, I think those kind of covers everything, Eddie, from a.
There is one press conference thought.
Are we going to go with
that Alabama guy? He looks pretty good.
The old draft comments on that. I tried to go back and watch. I would really love to see a screen grab of all three of their reactions to it. For those that are unfamiliar with what we're talking about, at one point Jim Irsay was asked about just kind of quarterback with the franchise and this hire and the meaning of that. And, Irsay starts talking, and he starts talking, and next thing you know, he's talking about the draft, and next thing you know, he's talking about trading up. And clearly he's getting to a point where Chris Ballard doesn't want him to say anything more.
Trading up or staying pat.
Ballard interjects, and,
or trading back.
And says, or trading back, and he also winks to the crowd for those that missed it.
Oh, that was not on the camera.
So a very subtle trade back and a wink comment out of Chris Ballard, which, again, that is very much Ballard and being...
And then Irsay goes, we all know Chris likes those picks.
And Irsay says that, and then Irsay then also responds with, the Alabama guy doesn't look bad, I tell you. So a reference there to Bryce Young. These are my thoughts on that comment. I would be stunned and shocked if Jim Irsay, Chris Ballard, and Shane Steichen are huddled up in the indoor facility before the start of the press conference and says, watch this. I'm gonna smoke screen him at one point during the presser. We're gonna get asked about a draft question. Chris, you interject. You say trade back, and I'm gonna say the Alabama guy, someone that I really like. Maybe I'm not giving Jim Irsay enough credit, but again, I would be stunned if that was the case. It is going to be Chris Ballard's biggest job between here and April 28, whenever it is, April 20-something or other, will be to make sure that it does not get out their interest in quarterback.
Combine in a couple of weeks too, right?
Combine?
Yeah, a couple of weeks, right?
Yeah, the start of the combine?
Yeah.
I mean, I'll never forget, Eddie, Ballard, through Irsay, basically at the start of the regime, saying, sending a memo to the entire staff of the Colts. Loose lips sink ships and football teams. And it was, we're talking underline, caps lock, keep Colts information within our building. No employee should communicate with outside media about anything having to do with our organization without prior authorization from senior management. I mean, it was, whoa. It was one of those, jolts. So, again, and for the most part, I think Bauer's done a wonderful job at it. I mean, look at how much of the coaching information leaked out. It was very difficult to crack that. And as it should be, that's got to be hugely important for the Colts to try and accomplish here over the next couple of weeks. Is there, interest from the owner and Bryce Young? Sure. And I think we got a Shane Steichen question and Twitter questions about, who draft-wise does he match up with. So I'll kind of hold off on that. But I really believe this. I think all three of them will get a vote, and I think you'll tally up who has the most votes. Maybe I'm wrong on that, but if Bryce Young has 2 and C.J. Stroud has 1,
or Anthony Richardson or Will Levis,
Richardson, and all those things. I watched Sunday night, and Eddie, sure, Bryce Young and Patrick Mahomes can make some plays with their legs. They're pretty darn special. But you know what? Those 2 can fit some balls in windows.
Yeah,
that not a lot of guys can. And I just keep on coming back to that.
I apologize for my 12-year-old laughter there.
Yeah, I feel like I was back with my morning producer, Mark Dykton. We're trying to be serious here. Young children could be in the car listening to this.
They wouldn't know what I'm talking about here.
You have, and this is kind of a Ballard quote, at some point you've got to throw from the pocket. At some point you get relegated to be a pocket passer. Obviously we didn't see it with Mahomes, but at one point your ankle's just not going to work in the second half of a game because you tweaked it. And can you be effective as a throwing quarterback? So, yes, mobility is a big thing. It's something that you want to have and you need. But also, I think we saw it on Sunday night. Drop those balls in the buckets, man.
Ready for Twitter questions?
Anything else from the press conference that stood out to you, or are you ready to get into Twitter questions?
I'm ready to go.
Shane Steichen made it very clear that he did not want to even sniff going down the, what did you hear about this organization before you interviewed here, and did that cause you any sort of reservations about taking this job? Did Nick Sirianni tell you bad things about the Colts? He did not step that. Shane Steichen is going to be a tough one to crack. You aren't going to get anything by him.
He's an onion. You got to peel him back a layer at a time.
And it might be a lot of peeling before we get something.
Oh, one final thing here before the Twitter questions. The Jeff Saturday video.
How about that? 4 minutes before the press conference starts.
I literally laughed out loud when he gave a shout out to the fans who signed the petition.
How about that? And I believe he referenced his
wife and his son. And he said,
son.
Yeah.
How great was that?
Yeah.
Saturday, he was out. It looked like he was fishing, right?
I don't know if he was out fishing or if he just has a lake house somewhere.
That's pretty good service he's got, if he's able to fire off that tweet. Do we have a Jeff Saturday related Twitter question?
I don't know.
If not, feel free to interject at some point, and I'll give you my Saturday thoughts on what he's going to do next.
Okay, yeah, I don't see one off first glance here.
Oh, okay, so let's just do it now. Financially, and life,
yes, yeah, I see one now. There it is.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah.
All right, let's jump into Twitter questions.
Ben is up first. Should Shane Steichen aggressively pursue Greg Roman, the former offensive coordinator of the Baltimore Ravens? He crafted the best running game in the NFL over the last 4 seasons and was an integral part in developing Lamar Jackson as a passing quarterback. I see a lot of parallels between the Ravens offensive system and the Colts' future offensive system with a mobile QB.
That is it's a good question. Greg Roman, of course, has a lot of history in the NFL, being a coordinator and being at a very high level. What about hesitancy in coming here and calling plays or not calling plays, I should say?
Yeah.
Would that, create some pause? Jonathan Gannon just got the job in Arizona. Would that be more attractive to him? And, who knows? We'll see how things play out. It is interesting. Will Steichen and Gannon be in a race here to try and fill with Eagles people?
Right.
Will that be anything to kind of think about here?
Who's the quarterback? Is it Brian Johnson?
Yeah, Brian Johnson's our quarterback.
I'm interested to see because I think Rappaport or Schefter had it that he would most likely be back with Philly as their OC after the news of the Steichen came out.
Do we have an OC in Carolina yet?
I thought they hired Deuce Staley
as their OC.
I don't know if that's 100% sure, but I thought he was at least hired onto their staff.
Yeah, I saw senior assistant for Jim Caldwell. Good to see Caldwell back in the mix. Some OC names. He's got history with guys like Mike McCoy.
And Pep Hamilton.
Pep Hamilton, who obviously has history here. Pep Hamilton's worked with young coaches before. The other Colts connection from Philly, which, again, I don't really know if this matters, but I like Jamal Singleton when he was here as the running backs coach. He's currently that with the Eagles. Anthony Lynn, roles would be reversed from what they were in 2020 when Lynn was the head coach.
Spatullo, right?
Patullo.
Thank you.
Yeah, Kevin Patullo. Where does he go? I think he was rumored with Carolina. Hey, somebody's got to get the promotion in Philly, either him or Brian Johnson.
Yeah.
And you would think the other one probably is either going to Carolina, Indy, or Arizona, I guess. And again, is the Arizona one more attractive because you would be calling the plays there versus coming here to Indy where you're not going to be calling the plays? And I don't know. Maybe some coaches look at that as, I'm good with it. I don't want to call plays. It's proven that you can still find a head coaching job even if you don't call plays.
Mm-hmm.
So those are all things to think about with that. But yeah, Roman is a name that I'll be really curious to see where he ends up.
Hunter's question is next. With Steichen most likely the 2023 head coach in Indy? Well, that's confirmed. I don't know what the best quarterback option would be. Is it C.J. Stroud, Bryce Young, or Will Levis? I was 100% Will Levis, but now I'm leaning more towards a guy like C.J. Stroud or Bryce Young. Just seems those two would fit Steichen's scheme better. What are your thoughts?
Hunter, it's a great question, and this is the beauty of the Shane Steichen hire. Eddie, I don't think you're pigeonholed with any of these guys.
Mm-hmm.
You can make a Phillip Rivers comparison to C.J. Stroud. Obviously, Stroud is has the ability to run. Certainly, Phillip Rivers never would have done in the college football semifinal what C.J. Stroud did. I think Bryce Young and Jalen Hurts, you see comparisons there as a creator. Their stature is different, but I think they are great creators. And Will Levis and Justin Herbert, I think, would have a lot of similarities as well. So there's not a Steichen mold. There's not a Steichen system. I would argue what he did with Jalen Hurts was so much more Jalen Hurts based.
Yeah.
Not necessarily philosophically what he unquestionably believes in. But that's the beauty of what he has accomplished in his NFL career. Leadership's going to matter a whole lot. And I know it's a very cliche word, and I know that's tough probably for even you and I to judge because you need to really get in there. I mean, Brian Decker, their personality coach, is going to sift through all these guys and going to talk to them at pro days and bring them in for workouts and all of that and talk to people at those respective schools. That's going to be a huge element of it. And that could be a tiebreaker, with all of this. And yeah, by all accounts, Hurts blows people out of the water in that realm. So clearly that is something that will resonate a lot with Shane Steichen. But I could be wrong on this, but I think all three of those decision makers will have a vote, and they'll have to decide whether that means we need to trade up or not.
Yeah.
I love Bryce Young. I love him. I understand the height concerns, and I understand there's a durability question that will be different than one he could answer playing for Alabama in the SEC. I can fully acknowledge that. On paper with these three, and if you want to throw Anthony Richardson in there, Stroud probably accomplishes the most of, I sleep the best at night with that pick, and there also is some really nice intrigue. Is that how you look at the C.J. Stroud pick? Whereas the Levis pick or the Richardson pick or the Young pick, for very different reasons, they all might make you toss and turn a little bit at night. But at some point, if you get it right, you could be the one that gets the last laugh.
Yeah.
So it's just it's an unbelievable debate, and it's what will be the difference for this franchise here for the next 5 to 10 years.
I was listening to Mel Kiper, so take that for
Todd.
I was listening to him talk. Yeah, it was pretty good. He said that if Bryce Young gets up to 190, 195 in that area when he weighs in at the combine, he will undoubtedly be the number one pick. If he comes in below that, then there's going to be serious consideration for somebody else.
Well, maybe Jim Irsay can get him on the weightlifting routine that Irsay used to be on, and now that Irsay has spoken publicly about the Alabama guy. Again, listen to that, Eddie. How many pound difference did you just say there?
I don't know what he was when he was at Alabama, but between 190 and 195 is what he would like to see. Mel Kiper did. Would like to see Bryce Young weigh come combine time.
It's crazy to think that could be the difference, in a team giving the stamp of approval.
Now, do they have to weigh in at the combine? Because that's my next question.
I think you can forego anything. I know a lot of people have said Bryce Young should gain a bunch of weight, weigh in at the combine, don't work out, lose the weight, don't weigh in at your pro day, and then work out in the pro day.
I was going to say, or you could not weigh in at the combine, continue to add like muscle and weight until your pro day.
Yeah, you could do it vice versa. I think the weight question is more of the issue now, so get it out of the way. Put on the weight now, and then come draft time or come pro day. Pro days are what, usually mid to late March.
Yeah.
That's typically, a little bit closer to the draft. Now you're at your playing weight. And, boy, there is an element of, like, who the hell cares? The guy's just a good football player. But I get it. I get there's prototypes, and I get there should be some questions about him physically.
Was that AJ?
That was AJ, yes. No, that was, I forget who asked that.
That was Hunter.
Hunter.
Okay.
I like that name. Hunter.
AJ is next. If Shane Steichen end up being the next head coach, I would feel comfortable with the Colts staying at 4 and taking any of the top 4 quarterbacks. That being said, if there was a guy that they are much higher on than the others, go get your guy. I couldn't agree more.
Yep. Times a million at the end. Go get your guy. If there is a separator, you go get that guy. If they get 3 of them to all vote yes on one guy, you go get that guy. You guys have heard me say it a million times this podcast. Kyle Shanahan was not content with Garoppolo. Andy Reid was not content with Alex Smith. Sean McVay was not content with Jared Goff.
Yeah.
3 brilliant offensive minds. All of those teams traded up for quarterbacks. And Shane Steichen, I think, could look at it and, hopefully that'll be a collaborative effort where they all agree. If we fall in love with somebody, you got to go up.
Hey, Kev. Hope all is well, good sir. This is from Tyler.
Tyler, good to hear from you.
Could you see any validity to Jeff Saturday being hired as the offensive line coach under Shane Steichen's regime, or even as an assistant coach of some sort? Maybe Saturday wouldn't be interested in something like that, even if it were offered to him, but the argument could be made the line showed a little improvement once he started his interim role, and some key players speak highly of his leadership and personal connections to the team. Thank you as always.
I appreciate that, Tyler. If Jeff Saturday wants to be a head football coach in the NFL, he needs to go become a position coach. He needs to work his way up. He needs to experience what life is like at a lower level, learn, and show that he's capable of being promoted and deserving of these deals and not just be Jim Irsay's friend.
Yeah.
I know that you can't really talk about Saturday with sounding, not as critical, and I don't know, maybe I could walk that line a little bit better. But I'm just being honest about the situation. Mm-hmm. Like, there is no team that should or will give him an opportunity to be the head football coach. Now I'm laughing about it. It's kind of crazy to think that he thought he deserved that. I think you should go back to ESPN. Financially, I think it makes a lot of sense. I think he'd bring great experience and great perspective when the time comes for interim head coaches and and all of those things. I do. I mean that in all seriousness.
I was just imagining Jeff Saturday on ESPN. They ask him about the Indianapolis Colts, and he just lets loose. He lets loose. This guy, when I was there, he didn't do this. He didn't do that. He didn't listen. He's not a leader.
I thought he handled things very, very classy in his, whatever that was, 90-second video that he put out today. I thought that was typical Jeff Saturday, what you're used to. And all of those things. And I know he's pissed. I mean, he's pissed at me. He's pissed at a lot of people for, their public comments about him and just, I don't know, degrading, if you will, what happened there in those 2 months. As far as bringing him in or keeping him into the organization, part of me wishes we could have got Jim Irsay off to the side today in a one-on-one setting or a smaller group setting. Again, to your earlier point, Eddie, in those pep rally-type press conferences, first off, it's the first time I've ever talked to Shane Steichen. Let's ask Shane Steichen the questions. But I would have loved to have asked Irsay.
Yeah.
Will Jeff Saturday have a role within the organization? I think it's awkward and a bit to do that in front of
Shane
Steichen and or Chris Ballard.
Yeah.
To be honest with you, again, I asked Jim Irsay in a very similar setting 2 months earlier, will Chris Ballard be here? So I guess it's not out of the norm for me to do that. But the two questions I did ask were more Steichen specific, and I felt like, will you call plays and what did you learn from Nick Sirianni were two questions that we all want to know.
I think Ballard was just sitting there like, damn, Kev.
Yeah, Ballard was probably like, well, thanks for not asking about whiteouts.
I'm in the room, gosh dang it.
Yeah, I know. And yeah, we've had a brief text exchange since. If I'm Shane Steichen and or Chris Ballard, I don't want Jeff Saturday in the organization right now. That is
Agreed.
A lot to look over your shoulder. It's awkward. It's cooks in the kitchen, and it's the Jim Irsay ex sitting right there, and the Jim Irsay still loves him.
Mm-hmm.
That's just I just Jeff Saturday is a great dude. Has done a ton for this organization, a ton for the NFL. But you know what? Let's see what we got in this Steichen Ballard group, and let Shane Steichen be Shane Steichen, and not have to be worried about Ring of Honor guy that has an important role within the organization.
Earlier you teased, do you have an idea of what he's going to do? And was that going back to ESPN? Was that your idea?
That is my belief. I assume he's going back to ESPN. We'll see when or if official word comes out on that, but that is the assumption that I'm under.
3 questions left. Tanner's is up next. Hey, Kev, I hope you and the family are doing well. My question is that since Chris Ballard was given full control over the new head coaching hire, does this lengthen his leash as the general manager? This will be the first time where he's getting the first choice or getting his first choice without being left at the altar or owner influence.
You and I were talking before the pod started, Eddie. With head coaching contracts, it's weird. Sometimes you do see timelines leaked on their contracts. Others you don't. If I'm not, and you've brought this up, right, Eddie? You've under the impression that Shane Steichen and Chris Ballard have the same agent.
Yeah, I thought so.
So with that, obviously, you don't have the agent trying to appease one side of the media there and doesn't really care what the other side thinks about it. The Ballard leash, fascinating question, Tanner. I would think Chris Ballard is here for multiple years. I would assume that he's going to get a couple of years to work with Shane Steichen and a couple of years to let the young quarterback grow. He's under contract through 2026? So that would be 4 more NFL seasons. Boy, that's a lot. Yeah, I think this does lengthen the leash. If Frank Reich is kept, I think the leash inevitably is shorter than what it is right now.
Brian is next. Hear me out on this, and I'd love to hear your thoughts. Was Frank Reich kept last year because of the amount of head coaching openings? It seems that the undressing of Jim Irsay after losing out of the playoffs was a fireable offense. This would help explain Irsay getting involved so much this year. Knowing that he had to make the move on from Reich before the season even started. That's my 30,000-foot view. Thoughts?
It's interesting. If you think back to last year's coaching cycle, you had 8 openings, Eddie. That's a lot. What do you have this year? 5? Of the 8, 5 were offensive coaches, 3 were defensive coaches. I will say this. I think Irsay was a lot closer to firing Frank Reich last year or wanting to fire him than maybe people believe. I think some of that was Ballard kind of having to talk him off the ledge a little bit. Yeah, we're a year too late on that. Again, it's kind of hard to argue for that. I think hindsight is super 2020. I don't know how many people would have been clamoring. I guess Irsay, to be fair, might have been one of them that were clamoring to fire Frank Reich last January. It's not like your locker room responded very well to Frank Reich's firing this year. Maybe they would have responded better with a full offseason. Maybe they needed to go through 4-12-1 to really be humbled by it all, and now they will naturally
and appreciate it,
react to
in a sense,
or just understand that that standard is not acceptable, and we need to do more and things like that. There, so again, hindsight is really 20/20, but I do think Jim Irsay was much closer to firing Frank Reich than maybe was led on.
Final question goes to Wake Spike. Ballard sifts through coaches while we watch the Eagles become NFC champions. I ask, how is this man employed still? We had Nick Sirianni and could have drafted Jalen Hurts. His tenure should have ended with the season. Please help me understand this man's continued employment.
I think there's other reasons besides the one that Wake Spike points out here to have reservations about Chris Ballard getting a 7th year. So I don't necessarily agree with those specific things and like, oh my gosh, let's crucify the man for that. I think there are other reasons to, have pause and question why he should be here. I guess, Eddie, this is kind of how I feel about it. And I said this a month and a half ago when Chris Ballard had his season-ending press conference, I guess a little over a month ago when he had a season-ending presser. I sat there and thought to myself, wow, it is amazing this dude's getting a 7th year.
Yep.
It's amazing. And the main reasons I point to are the results of one playoff win and no division titles. And more than anything than those first two, it's that now you're trending in this downward direction. You just went 4-12-1 in year 6. You have no young quarterback on the roster that you even want to think twice about potentially being your franchise quarterback. If you had 4-12-1 2 years ago, but yet you had this draft pick of like, hey, this could be a guy that, you just give him time, the arrow could be pointing up. If that guy would have started the last 4 games of the season and you liked what you saw and you think there might be something there, you don't have that either. So that's my thought on it. And again, we will answer Twitter questions because that is a huge part of this show. And I understand where the sentiment of this question is at. And if we continue to get Chris Ballard type questions, we'll continue to throw them on whenever we feel like it is, smart or whatever. Warranted, yeah. But also, Eddie, he's here, and he ain't going anywhere. So if you look at it right now, with the draft coming up, or I should say free agency coming up in a month, the draft in a little over 2 months, he's here. He's getting a 7th year at it. You better prove that you can adapt and get your roster back to being an acceptable roster in an AFC that is absolutely loaded. Because as I said earlier, you've got 7 AFC teams. All made the playoffs last year. All 7 of those quarterbacks are age 27 or younger. Well, Eddie, what if I told you 3 other quarterbacks will make the playoffs next year?
Is this an ESPN 30 for 30?
That are age 27 or younger. What if I said Deshaun Watson and the Browns will make the playoffs? You wouldn't laugh at me.
No.
What if I said Mac Jones and the Patriots will get back to the playoffs?
I'd laugh at you.
They did make it the year prior, so they have made it already with him. Or what if I said Kenny Pickett and the Steelers make the playoffs? They were very, very close. What I'm getting at is there's 7 teams that made the playoffs with 27 or younger. There's 3 more on top of those 7. So there's 10 teams in the AFC right now that you would not burst out laughing if I said they will make the playoffs last year and all 10 of those teams have a quarterback 27 years old or younger. You better get in the dance.
Yeah.
Or else you're going to get run off the floor because you're already way off the floor. You've got to do that. And that's why this hire in general, bringing it full circle, I guess, to the whole topic of this podcast, what Shane Steichen gives you is he provides that quarterback to walk into a kitchen, and there's a lot of ingredients that quarterback
can work with,
can do something with.
Yeah.
And that is so critical. And the nice thing is those ingredients won't necessarily be leaving said kitchen. Throughout this quarterback's tenure, basically what you've said is Shane Steichen and said quarterback, you are our next era. And it might blow up, It might go horribly. It might go beautifully. But that is the era. And that, I think, is an important step in the 2023 NFL world to create and trying to build the phrase that I've said endlessly of sustained success. We'll see if it works out, but I do think that is the biggest appeal in the Shane Steichen hire, the fact that you provide that stability and comfort for whatever that quarterback draft pick is going to be, and you have an offensive mind that has the respect of the oldish guard in a Phillip Rivers or a Norv Turner, which means to earn that respect, you got to be smart. But he also is open-minded enough to know what wins in modern.
Yeah.
And find that balance, really, really important. And for 37 years old, it's quite impressive. So I like what I heard from Shane Steichen today. Let the fun begin.
6 days older than Matt Ryan.
I know. It's crazy, man. I mean, hell, he's just a few years older than I am. Wild. He's Eddie Garrison. I'm Kevin Bowen. Eddie, next week I will be in Florida.
What?
Yeah.
Why?
Well, you got to get away after 6 weeks of this search. No, we've had this planned with my side of the family for a while now. Every other year we go down to Florida.
Weren't you just there like last week?
Well, it was a couple months ago. Yes, I was fortunately there with the other side of the family.
Can you pick a different state?
I know. Yeah, we don't have a lot of variety, do we?
Why not Alaska?
It's funny when I told my family the best dates that worked for this. We planned this. Pretty much a year ago. I said, well, in case the Colts make the Super Bowl.
We're going to Disney?
Well, I said, in case the Colts make the Super Bowl, we're not Disney bound just yet. In case they make the Super Bowl, mid-February would work best because that'll fall right in between potential Super Bowl and the Combine. And also, I usually like this time of year because it's NBA All-Star break. And for those that don't know, I co-host a morning show from 7 to 10 a.m. And so we talk a lot of Pacers as well on that show. Well, I guess I got 2 of the 3 right. I got the All-Star break right, and I got we're still a couple weeks out from the Combine. I did not get the Colts in the Super Bowl part right, but I did get the Colts still in the news cycle a couple days after the Super Bowl. So I was getting really nervous there for a minute. I know probably very few people care about my lifestyle, but what I'm getting at is this. I think we have exhausted the head coach talk for the last month and a half. Sure, we'll have assistant hires and coordinator hires over the next week. We'll recap that on a podcast starting, I guess, just before the beginning of the Combine, and we'll start ranking free agents. Because one of my favorite pods we do every year, green, yellow, red. Slot the free agents into those categories. Green, you want to bring back. Yellow, a little on the fence. Red, you do not. We'll do that on the podcast when we come back. We'll probably do that, honestly, Monday the 27th. And we'll have a lot of Combine coverage then the rest of that week.
Ooh, I'm excited.
He's Eddie Garrison. I'm Kevin Bowen. Everybody have a great, great week. We'll talk to you in 2 weeks. 107.5 The Fan. Tons of written content on Shane Steichen. See ya.